through the pilot that we launched this last fall. We were participating in this pilot, so we're really grateful for the work that we're able to bring forward. I am going to turn it back over quickly to Melissa, Hannah, Jessica, and Anna to walk through the webinar today. But on behalf of Wisconsin Rare, just want to say a big thank you to everyone who joined and to the group that's put this work together. We're really thankful for the opportunity and hope you enjoy today. All of the materials that they have worked on over the past semester are available on our website and on YouTube as well. So we want to make sure to share this widely. If you have questions, we'll have Q&A at the end. So I think Melissa, am I turning it over to you?
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
Welcome, and thank you.
Well, hello, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction here. To start that off, though, wanted to say that this meeting is going to be recorded. So if anyone feels uncomfortable with having their camera on, go ahead. You can turn that off, mute yourselves. And if any questions come up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll definitely address them all at the end. But welcome to our Navigating the Genetic Maze webinar with partnership through Wisconsin Rare and GC Connexins and the rare disease world in general. We have some introductions to make, so I'll let Hannah introduce herself really quick.
Yeah, so hi everybody. It's wonderful to meet you all. My name is Hannah Lee. I am a genetic counseling student at Sarah Lawrence College, which is based out of New York. I'm originally from Canada, from the Toronto area, and I'll pass it off to Melissa.
So Melissa, my name is Melissa Hayden. I am a second-year genetic counseling student at Bay Path University, and I am originally and still living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So we wanted to start our part of the presentation by extending heartfelt thanks to Wisconsin Rare, Rare Rising, and GC Connexins, mostly for giving us this incredible opportunity to present today, and then to be a part of this advocacy rotation as genetic counseling students. We also wanted to give special thanks to our amazing genetic counseling supervisors, Jess and Anna, not only for their support and guidance, but also Anna, Lainey, and Kimberly from Wisconsin Rare for their stories and for allowing us this experience. And then a huge thank you to any of the wonderful parents, maybe they're joining us today, that took the time out of their busy schedules to share their personal stories and those powerful testimonies about living with rare disease. So those stories have been a true inspiration to us, and we couldn't be more grateful for this opportunity to learn and grow from you all. In terms of our introduction to genetic counseling, some of you may know that or have had genetic counseling, but genetic counseling is a process that offers individuals and families information and support to understand and make informed decisions about their genetic health. It focuses on providing information about genetic conditions, how genes work, and what genetic tests can and cannot reveal. So as genetic counselors, we work with patients to interpret genetic test results. We assess the risk of inherited conditions and provide support in your decision making. We can also help families understand the potential for inherited diseases and associated with a vast array of conditions and mutations within our genes. Our role is especially crucial for families affected by rare genetic diseases, as they can provide clarity on often complex and uncertain world when you're in the rare disease world. So since many of you may be from the rare disease community, the chances to having this question answer be yes might be high. But just to get a sense of the odds, have you ever met with a genetic counselor before? And go ahead and feel free to type your answer in the chat. Let's see. I see we have a lot of essentially yes or no, but I'm aware. And I think based on the topic of this webinar, we assumed that would be the answer. But hopefully for those who have and even haven't, who aren't aware, we can confirm some of those things or maybe help with what you can look forward to if you are to see a genetic counselor. In today's presentation, we aim to provide you mostly with a clear understanding of what genetic counselors do, who they are, and how they can support the rare disease community. We plan on covering a brief background of the actual genetics and then explain the role of the genetic counselor through these topics, through the interpretation and communication regarding complex genetic information, how we clarify inheritance patterns, how we can explain the benefits and limitations of genetic testing, how we can help to make informed decisions and guide management, how we can provide emotional and psychological support, how we can help in navigating the changing landscape of genetics, and lastly, how we can help in facilitating the coordination of care. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to get started.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So the first thing we're going to be talking about today is how genetic counselors help to interpret and communicate complex genetic information to the patient. So as we know, genetics is a complex science. However, at its core, it's based on this simple idea that everyone has the same set and amount of genes, and we inherit half of our genes from our father and the other half from our mother. What makes each person individual is how those genes function. So some of you may have a solid understanding of genetics based off of our last question. Some of you have met with genetic counselors before. But just to get a sense of your familiarity, please type your answer in the chat of how familiar you are with genetics. And unfortunately, I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but maybe Alyssa, you can look at the answers for us.
Kind of a mixed bag here, seeing a couple very familiar and then a couple B's and C's, so basics.
Okay, so we'll provide a little bit of an overview just to get everybody sort of on the same page and just to give everybody a little bit of background. What is a genome? What is our genetic material? You might hear the word genome. Genome basically means our complete set of genetic material in ourselves or in other organisms. So first off, our bodies are made up of billions and billions of cells. Cells are the fundamental building blocks to all living organisms. They carry out all the vital functions that sustain life. If we go a little bit further into the cell, within our cells are essential resources needed for survival. One of these is the nucleus. And it is within this nucleus that what's within the nucleus of all of our cells that our genetic information lives and where it is stored. If we go a little bit deeper into the nucleus, we'll see these structures called chromosomes. And chromosomes are basically how our DNA is organized and stored. Humans have 46 chromosomes in total, and they're organized into 23 pairs. One chromosome in the pair comes from our mother, and the other chromosome in our pair comes from our father. These chromosomes ensure that genetic information is properly divided and organized for the body to function correctly. Within our chromosomes, we have our DNA, and these DNA are basically long coiled molecules that hold all of the instructions and the building blocks to maintain the body and its natural functions. DNA acts as the blueprint, which encodes all of the information required for cells to grow, divide, and function. So what are genes? What do genes do? So genes essentially are segments of DNA that provide a very specific instructions. And the way they do this is by producing proteins. These proteins carry out many essential roles, from building muscles to defending against infections, and so much more. Each gene contains instructions for a particular trait or function, such as determining your eye color or regulating how your body develops and maintains its structure. So this is a fun question, and we don't expect you to know the answer. It's just a kind of a fun guess. But how many genes do you think there are in the human genome? You can take a stab at it in the chat.
got a couple guesses here. We're getting a lot of C, Ds, and Es.
Okay, okay. All right. All right, so who's ready for the answer? So the answer is actually 20,000, so maybe a little less than what you thought. But in a human genome, we have just over 20,000 genes. And while we all share a similar genetic blueprint, what makes us each unique is how those genes function and are expressed. So you might have also heard the word variants or a variant, something along those lines. And what a variant is a change in the DNA sequence of a gene. These changes may be small, affecting maybe just one instruction or one letter in the instruction, or they can be larger, affecting maybe larger sentences or sequences within our instructions. Sometimes these variations do not cause any real effect, but other times they can have varying levels of effects on our bodies. So as we've discussed, genetics can be, So as we've discussed, genetic variations can range from very small mutations in a single gene. An example of this would be like cystic fibrosis, where a minor change in a specific gene can disrupt protein function, causing disease. So this would be in the disease-causing or harmful category. Some other variations can affect things like our blood cells and may offer protection against diseases. An example of this would be in certain mutations in a gene that could cause sickle cell disease. Certain variations can also lead to protection against viruses like malaria. And some of these variations can be more neutral, and they just make us who we are. So for example, different eye colors or different hair colors, they don't necessarily have a harmful or beneficial effect on the body, but they just make us unique and who we are. So those are the different classifying forms of variants. So as we've discussed, genetics can be pretty challenging to understand. And one of the key roles of genetic counselors is to break down all this information that we've discussed so far in a way that's understandable and digestible for people of all backgrounds and familiarities with genetics. One of my favorite analogies for explaining DNA and genes is to relate them to an instruction manual. So in this analogy, the chromosomes would serve as the manuals. The DNA would be the chapters in the book. The genes would be the individual letters, so on and so forth. And if any of these letters or sentences or chapters are added or missing in this manual, it can affect how the instruction manual is played out and how the building blocks of whatever you're building are formed. So that's kind of a little overview on genetics as a whole, protein function, variants, etc. But there's a lot more that you can explore, and we've actually created a little bit more more information in this video that we've created. You can access it by visiting the Wisconsin Rare website. It's in the genetic testing section. You can also scan the QR code or type in the link underneath it to visit it on YouTube. So those are multiple ways you can access our videos.
So next, we're going to cover inheritance patterns. And genetic counselors help families understand how rare diseases are passed down. Inheritance patterns can be complicated. So with some diseases in rare disease world not being inherited in the immediately obvious way. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that, and then also how genetic counselors work to clarify those topics. So recall that we get half our genetic information from our father and half from our mother. So with that being said, each parent contributes unique genetic traits such as eye color, hair color, or even the possibility of certain conditions or diseases. These traits are spread across different chromosomes, coming together to essentially shape your individual journey. We previously mentioned that different variants or mutations may lead to different versions of a specific gene. So in other words, different variants lead to different traits, and these traits are called alleles. Each gene in your DNA comes in different forms, and these are the alleles. For example, a gene might control eye color, and the alleles for that gene could determine whether you have blue or brown eyes. So while a gene is the overall instruction, alleles are the variations that provide different versions of that instruction. And that's what's influencing how these traits are expressed and then passed down. The different ways these traits are passed down through families are called inheritance patterns. So genetics follows different inheritance patterns. And what we're going to cover today is the more common ones. And these are dominant inheritance, recessive inheritance, and de novo or spontaneous inheritance. In dominant inheritance, only one copy of a changed or mutated gene is needed to express the condition. So if one parent carries the mutation, each child has a 50% chance of inheriting, since each parent contributes half of their genetic information for the child. In recessive inheritance, both copies of the gene must have the mutation for the condition to occur. So if both parents happen to be carriers, there's a 25% chance that the child will inherit the condition. I kind of want to point out the picture here. If you can see, Hannah has made this beautiful slide with the color coordinations. So being a carrier means that they have one gene that is working, while the other gene has that variant, has that change that could be disease causing. And now if you look at affected versus unaffected, our affected child is the one that has inherited both of the changed genes. For de novo inheritance or spontaneous inheritance, these are variations that appear for the first time within a family, while neither parent happened to carry that variation or mutation. These occur randomly during the formation of the egg or sperm and can result in a child being affected without having that condition run in the family. For families with a child affected by a rare disease, understanding how these conditions are passed down is critical. It can influence family planning, it can help identify risk for siblings, and also assessing risks in future pregnancies. So as genetic counselors, our goal is to help families understand these inheritance patterns, making it easier for them to plan for the future, as well as to help them make informed decisions. So as genetic counselors, we're not only simplifying this complex information, explaining that while everyone shares the same basic set of genes, disease can occur when those genes are altered in ways that affect protein function. We're also clarifying that these variations can be inherited from one or both parents or arise spontaneously. We discussed that rare diseases often involve those variations with inheritance patterns that aren't easily recognizable. And the ones that we explained today are the more common ones, the ones that we recognize more. So if you're interested in learning more about these more difficult to understand inheritance patterns, Hannah and I have also made a video covering complex inheritance as well as the spontaneous mutations and variations. So here is the video specifically dedicated to inheritance, if you guys are interested in watching that.
Okay, so now that we understand a bit about genetics and inheritance patterns, we'll go into how genetic counselors can explain the benefits and limitations of genetic testing. So genetic testing comes in various forms depending on the information that's being sought out, such as ancestry, health risks, or specific conditions. There's no single genetic test out there on the market that can detect all types of mutations. And I think this is a really important point to understand, just because identifying a genetic test is really a big portion of what genetic counselors and other genetic providers do so that we can find the answers for you and your family. Testing methods can differ in scope, accuracy, and purpose. And the choice of test really depends on the clinical situation, what condition we suspect, and what level of detail we really want to dive into. So it's important to understand the strengths and limitations of each genetic test, and so that you guys can make informed decisions about your health. So here is just a list of some of the genetic tests that are on the market right now. Each test is very different in its approach and at what level it looks at the DNA. Some common differences that you can ask your providers about when undergoing genetic testing would be turnaround times, costs, variations in the different techniques, what they can and cannot detect, and more. Other considerations might be the level of detail provided by the test. Additionally, the potential for any false positives or false negatives, which can really inform the clinical utility and the purpose of the test. There might also be some ethical and psychosocial implications, such as the potential for some maybe uncertain results or some confusing findings, which we'll go into a little bit throughout the presentation. And those are all things to weigh when you're talking about undergoing genetic testing or the potential to undergo genetic testing. So overall, there's 3 main types of testing, which are organized by their overall purpose. So diagnostic testing, the first one on the left here, is used when a person is showing symptoms of a specific disorder or condition. The goal of this test is to confirm or to diagnose this condition in the individual. The second one is predictive testing, and predictive testing is used to assess an individual's risk or likelihood of developing a certain condition in the future based off of their genetic profile. This is typically done before symptoms appear, often when there is a known family history of a genetic condition in the family. And it's useful for conditions that can develop later on in life. An example of this would be genetic testing for cancer predispositions. The third form of testing would be screening tests, like non-invasive prenatal screening, which some of you may have had done in pregnancy. And another form of this would be carrier screening. And this is used to assess the risk of genetic condition, but they don't provide an official diagnosis. Usually, if a screening test comes back positive, further confirmational studies are needed to be done in order to confirm that specific finding. Oh, sorry. An example of this would be testing in the prenatal setting that would increase the likelihood of the pregnancy having a chromosomal abnormality, such as Down syndrome or trisomy 21. With a positive screening test, further diagnostic methods are needed in order to confirm this finding. And that is typically discussed with a genetic counselor or with a genetic provider at the time of that result. So genetic testing has limitations, and genetic counselors and other genetic providers are trained to discuss these limitations with you all. Especially in the rare disease space, these limitations can often be more challenging due to the limited understanding of some of the conditions that we may be testing for. There's a higher likelihood of results to come back negative or inconclusive, which may lead to frustration for families that are really seeking answers. And it may create this sense of uncertainty and unanswered questions. So genetic counselors are trained to help work with you through that uncertainty and to get you access to the care that you need, even with this sort of uncertainty. So to learn more about genetic testing, again, we're here to show off our videos as well too. If you would like to learn more about it, we will dive into a lot of the genetic testing methods that I showed on that one slide. And you can kind of see how these genetic testing methods work, their benefits, their limitations, and see how they can detect rare disease or certain genetic conditions by doing these tests. So again, you can go to the Wisconsin Rare website, or you can scan the QR code or visit the YouTube link. So here's another question. And again, we don't expect you to know the answers, but just to see what types of samples can be used to perform genetic testing. Give us your best guess by typing the answer in the chat.
I'm getting a lot of E, Hannah.
So wonderful. That is the correct answer. We can collect genetic information through many different ways, whether that be blood, saliva, a biopsy, or a piece of tissue, also a cheek swab. Some of these samples can be used for only certain genetic tests, but a lot of them do have multiple options. So say my child doesn't want to have a blood sample taken, or they're not good with drawing blood. There's usually, I won't say all the time, but there's usually the option of doing maybe a cheek swab or saliva as well too. And that's something you can discuss with your provider.
All right, so you've had genetic testing done. Your genetic counselor has explained what they were looking for, what the test was that was used. What do you do with those results? So next we want to discuss not only how can genetic counselors help families make informed decisions, but also just get a better understanding of what this medical jargon on the test results could mean for you. So genetic counselors provide guidance. They provide guidance on how the results of that genetic testing may affect the course of your treatment. They could provide any screening available for related conditions, as well as future management or surveillance needs. In regards to receiving test results, the first question you may have is, what does this result mean? You'll probably look for whether the result indicates a genetic risk or condition and how this might affect you or your loved one's future. You might see terms like pathogenic, benign, or variant of uncertain significance, also called a VUS. And these terms are used really to help give meaning to the genetic variants that were identified in your test. So understanding them not only will help guide decisions about your healthcare and family planning, or the next steps in managing your health, but also sometimes give you an answer. So in terms of breaking down these terms, let's do that so we can help you interpret your test results. When receiving results from a genetic test and you receive a positive result, that means that a specific genetic change has been identified, and we know that that change is associated with a certain health condition or disease. This is a diagnostic result. These terms, the terms that are considered positive are terms like pathogenic and likely pathogenic variants and mutations. A negative result is when there is no identified genetic change out of all the genes that were tested on that specific test that is known to be associated with a health condition or disease. So everyone has variations within their genetic information, but when a genetic test comes back negative, it means that among the genes that were analyzed and the specific mutations the test was designed to detect, no genetic changes associated with a known condition or disease were identified. That doesn't mean that no variations were found. There may have been, but either based on existing research or population data, those variants were classified as benign, meaning they are not disease-causing and simply just contribute to what makes you unique. A negative result also does not rule out the possibility of a genetic contribution to the condition being tested for. It might mean that the specific test couldn't detect the underlying genetic cause, or that the genetic factor involved has yet to be discovered. So a negative test may be frustrating to receive, as it does not always provide an answer or a diagnosis. Lastly, the test may result as a variant of uncertain or unknown significance, otherwise known as a VUS, like I stated earlier. A VUS is when a genetic change has been identified, but we don't have enough information to say whether it is harmless, harmful, or if it has any effect at all. This can happen because either there isn't enough research on that specific variant, or it may be found in people without health issues. The majority of the time, these VUSs are eventually reclassified as benign and considered non-disease causing. However, within the rare disease community, it's not uncommon for a VUS to be used alongside clinical information and physician discretion to form a diagnosis. This is obviously because these are rare diseases and they're not seen as often within the population, so there just is not enough information known about these exact variations. Sometimes physicians can take what we know about the function of the gene and the type of mutation occurring, as well as any comparative family genetic testing to determine if it matches the clinical fit and can be considered diagnostic. So a fun VUS question here. But if you were to have a VUS, what percentage of variants do you think are reclassified? That just means after more data has been received, they were able to change if it was pathogenic or benign. So what percentage of variants do you think are reclassified to a negative or benign result? Okay. I see my Bay Path GC cohort chiming in here too. Good job, guys. The answer, I got mixed across the board, by the way, but the answer, Hannah,
The answer is
90%. There we go. However, I should say, most of the genetic information in population studies comes from individuals of Western European ancestry, that mixed white, mixed European background. The statistic is going to be most accurate for individuals from that background. For those from smaller ethnic groups or outside this ancestry I just talked about, the available genetic data is more limited and less well studied. So as a result of that, the likelihood of a benign reclassification of a VUS is more around 50%. But in general, for the data we've received from that mixed European ancestry, we get about 90% coming back as benign. The genetic results that we just mentioned, whether it be positive, negative, or a VUS, these are going to be found on that tangible genetic test result that you'll receive, along with a lot of other useful information. There's a lot of information on these test results, and it can be a lot of medical jargon, but some other things that you might see could be the methods and procedures of the actual test itself, the very specific gene, and then the location on the gene that the variant was found. Remembering that we have so many genes and we have 2 copies of each gene. Those genes, if you want to lay them out on a table, they're very long and have different points along it. So they're numbered. So one gene can have multiple different types of variations on it. It will list that. It will also list the condition that change was associated with, as well as more information about that condition, whether that be future management and screening options, or if any necessary further testing was required for a diagnosis. Another thing some tests will include are additional findings that were not associated with the reason for testing or that diagnosis. Most labs will give resources or studies, if available, regarding the information that they used to determine how to classify that specific variant. So really, there's a lot of useful information, and genetic counselors are there to weed it out and then tailor a specific management or guidance to you as the patient. Then they also explain the results to the patient. They help these families of children with rare diseases navigate the complexities of available treatments or clinical trials or research-based recommendations. They also provide guidance on reproductive decisions, such as prenatal testing, as well as if this is something that is within the family or hereditary. There are options for future reproduction, like pre-implantation genetic testing, sometimes called PGT. And that could be through in vitro or exploring alternative options like adoption or donor eggs and sperm. And lastly, genetic counselors can provide just that tailored approach that I mentioned, just a very personalized touch to offering resources, whether that be local opportunities or the most up-to-date information for specific needs for you as a family. And the goal is to ensure that the families feel supported and have the tools that they need during what can be a very confusing and challenging time. So once again, a very selfless plug, I'm not sure. We've created a video discussing how to interpret genetic testing results. We actually walk through examples from different labs, helping to break down that jargon that's often found in those genetic reports. So if you're interested, please check out this video, and handing it back over to Hannah.
Okay, so another role for genetic counselors in clinic is to provide you with emotional and psychological support as you're going through your rare diagnosis journey. So receiving a diagnosis or confusing results can lead to varying degrees of emotional responses. Families of children with rare disease often face emotional distress. Often this is because rare diseases are often poorly understood. There's limited research conducted on some of these conditions just because of how rare they are. And that can all lead to limited resources and overall confusion from families that are affected. Because the emotional impact of rare diseases can be overwhelming, genetic counselors are trained to provide essential emotional support to these families. They provide a compassionate listening ear to help families process complex emotions related to their child's condition. GCs also assist with managing stress and uncertainty of dealing with a rare genetic disorder and the potential for passing it on to other siblings or future children. For example, parents of a child with a rare disease might feel guilt about potentially passing on a genetic mutation. Counselors help to address these feelings and provide reassurance and guidance and support and resources wherever needed. So this is just a question to you all. In your past experiences with other medical professionals or genetic counselors, have you felt adequately emotionally supported? And feel free to type your answer in the chat.
I think sadly we're seeing not as much A's as we would have hoped.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely a priority for us as genetic counselors. Our training focuses not just on the genetics and the hard science, but also on how to communicate with individuals and how to help them through this tumultuous time. So genetic counselors really do have all the tools to help you navigate your rare disease journey and hopefully can support you throughout this process. And I really do hope that in your future interactions with other medical professionals and genetic counselors that you feel more comfortable saying A rather than the other answers.
Hannah and I were actually talking about that while coming up with this question. Our fear was that we wouldn't hear that. And we decided to say that part of the new generation of genetic counselors, that we're going to hopefully make that change for you guys and be able to support more. In terms of navigating the genetic landscapes, genetics is an ever-evolving field with continuous advancements in research, testing, and treatment options. So as genetic counselors, one of our jobs is to stay updated on the latest developments to help families understand that it's constantly changing, and hopefully we can keep up to date with their condition or disease in terms of treatment and management. Because advancements in genetics are ever changing, we've seen that they're revolutionizing diagnosis and treatment. We have gene therapies like Zolgensma for SMA to CRISPR gene editing for sickle cell disease. There's RNA-based drugs like Spinraza. We're seeing new ways to target the root causes of genetic conditions. There's expanded newborn screening, pharmacogenomics, and improved tools like whole genome sequencing, which are also helping to make early diagnoses as well as personalized care more accessible than it's ever been. Genetic counselors are vital in ensuring that families are informed about these advances, helping to provide updates on any new research, testing, or treatment breakthroughs that could benefit their child's care. And we don't have them listed here, but just some general resources that could be provided in terms of care and treatment. I'm sure if you're in the rare disease world, you've heard of the National Organization for Rare Diseases, NORD. There are so many other resources out there. NSGC always has tools for looking up genetic counselors or helping with further research. There is the Genetics and Rare Diseases Information Center, Global Genes, Rare Connect, Rare Disease United Foundation. And then in terms of trials, there's in treatments or rare disease specific trial resources. There's always clinicaltrials.gov, RareX, NORD has a great rare disease clinical trial pipeline. And then there All of Us research program or the Undiagnosed Diseases Network or Cure Rare Disease. And a lot of these sites require some input and research to get through, to weed out what you're actually looking for, to know if you or your child qualify for testing. And yes, it's very difficult to personalize care for every single patient, but you will become the professional within your own condition and disease. So knowing that these resources are out there, to get an idea, finding something and shooting it over to your genetic counselor provider saying, do we qualify for this? You have to also be your own advocate as much as we want to advocate for you. So just providing you those resources to help you see if there's things out there.
So lastly, we just wanted to touch on how genetic counselors and genetic providers in general help to facilitate the coordination of care. So rare disease often require involvement of multiple specialists, as I'm sure the parents in the room can definitely relate to. So genetic counselors kind of serve as the quarterback, if you will. They help to facilitate the coordination of care between all these different specialties that you might see, whether that's pediatrics, neurology, cardiology, urology. The list can go on and on and on about all the different supports that someone affected by rare disease would need. So we serve as kind of the person to give you all those referrals and to point you in the right direction as to who to get your care from and what you need. Genetic counselors also coordinate care by helping families navigate the healthcare system and can connect you with support groups or advocacy organizations like Wisconsin Rare. An example of how we can help you navigate the healthcare system would be helping you get IEP services through the educational system that you're a part of. Sometimes you need a letter from someone indicating the diagnosis that your child has. So that's something that genetics providers can help you with and can help you get set up with the appropriate services that you and your child need. We just spoke at length about the role of genetic counselors and how genetic counselors can help you. And if you are looking to get in touch with a genetic counselor, the National Society of Genetic Counselors, which is kind of our overarching organization, has a website where you can find a genetic counselor in your area. All you have to do is go to findageneticcounselor.nsgc.org, and you can put in your location and it will show you all the genetics providers and genetic counselors that are close to your area. So that's somewhere that you can turn to find a genetic counselor and access genetic services. So we'd like to turn it back over to you all for any questions that you have about genetics or about genetic counseling. We wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining today. And we are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I saw in the chat that there are some people sharing either like personal stories or new research out there. Jess and I have also kind of dropped in some of those resources that I had just mentioned. But what's your question? I think Amina, is that?
I have a question because of all the stuff that I've learned in the last year or so. And I have hypermobility EDS. And I was told at the age of 21 that I was mentally crazy and it was all in my head. And I knew that something was wrong with me. And something just kept saying, go to school. You can do it all by yourself. You can figure it out by yourself. But something just kept telling me to go to school to become a research scientist. But I knew that I couldn't because I was so sick. And but something just kept forcing me to go to school to become this research scientist. But I've been knowing I want to be a research scientist since the age of 6. So I just got up and just pushed myself through it. And I still haven't graduated, but I'm close to getting 3 degrees. But I kept going back. But it wasn't even a point of me even going to school to even get the degree. It was the point of me going to school for this from 21 to now for me to get the education to diagnose myself. I didn't even realize I was even close to getting 3 degrees at all, period, until 4 years ago. I have been to school like the last 4 years, just doing education at home. But I ended up going to school for biotechnology, laboratory technician, and I went there to become a research scientist to do trials on people to figure out what was wrong with me. And so I call myself an ancestry research scientist is what I call myself. And that's what I'm really good at. And so I went through my whole medical record, my children's, I have 6 children. So it made it really easy for me to figure it all out. 4 of my children, I know for a fact have this. So it made it really easy. And after going through all my whole medical record and my children's, I realized it had to be hypermobility EDS. It had to be. But nobody wouldn't listen to me. They kept saying it was just you being crazy, you being mental. And if you look through my whole medical record, I'm screaming I have hypermobility EDS. Can't you see? But I lost all my kids. I lost everything, like everything. But to find out hypermobility EDS, it's not even from the United States. And that's why the US doesn't know anything about this disease. It's actually from Africa from a long time ago. And that's what my website is called, Hypermobility EDS and Ashkenazi Jewish Descent. I figured out with the help of Allah to figure out exactly what happened, where I came from. And it all went back to the Dead Sea. And that's when I found out that my lineage, we are the first people that came here, and it all goes back to Adam and Eve. And the proof, I didn't only figure out where my disease came from. I figured out that it literally came, like, I'm all the way from the Bible. We're kin to Noah. Like, I'm kin to Ashkenazi Jewish descents are kin to Noah. And my people in Jerusalem have this disease called hypermobility EDS, which is around the Dead Sea. But the US doesn't know about all of this stuff. But if you go to my country, they know all about this stuff, but the US doesn't. And it's called being persecuted for our religion, for our diseases, for our knowledge, being very smart and educated. And we getting treated really bad all over the world. But we're losing all our children because of all of this. And I don't know how to get help because I'm from a different country. And by me being a Jew, how do I supposed to get help in explaining that my disease came from a different country that they don't understand? Like, nobody isn't listening to me. So that's the biggest reason why I made my website, because I know my country knows about what's wrong with me. And I'm using their information from their platforms out here to try to get the US to see that hypermobility EDS, you don't understand what it is or where it's from, because it's not even from this country. It's from Africa. And I can't get help.
Yeah, in general, I know that, you know, hypermobile EDS there is no genetic cause right now, right? They don't
Oh,
have,
this you don't. I know why there's not. This goes all the way into the Bible. All of this stuff is in the Bible. I can't even explain it unless you go to my website and see it. I have a podcast about this as well too, starting from season 1 and going all the way up to explain it from piece to piece to get people to understand what I'm talking about. But that's why there's no genetic marker, because this is not, I can't even explain it. You have to do some research on it. It's there is no genetic link, because there is no genetic link. It's linked because of what we've done on this earth. The sin is because of sin.
Mm.
It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. I can't even explain it, but it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. And this is what I'm trying to get people to see, that we all come from Africa, and our blood is cursed. We sinned.
Amna, thank you so much for sharing all this. Can you put those like your website and stuff in our chat here?
Yeah,
So we
I
can
have a
all check it out.
Spotify. Yeah, but my Spotify, I'm hoping that people go to my Spotify, because if you don't break it all the way down, then no one, the US is not going to understand.
Yeah.
But my country praises me. They love me. It feels so good to feel loved. Like, they know what I'm talking about. They believe me. They understand me, because they are people. They're from Israel. They're from Jerusalem. But talking to people here, I'm really trying my best to help people. But it's more like, well, I'm Caucasian. I don't have any black in me. Everybody got black in them. You just don't know it. And it's really sad, because on 23andMe, that is a big thing on 23andMe. And I learned a lot from 23andMe. About 85% of Ashkenazi Jewish descents are finding out that they're Ashkenazi Jewish descent through 23andMe, and so did I. And it's really interesting. But then I go back to, like, if you look through my profile with all my descendants from that's on my 23andMe, the majority of them are not black. The majority of them are white. But it goes back to my European. I do have European in me as well too, which Ashkenazi Jewish descents, they made it a lot with Europeans. And that's why we're so mixed with UK. That's why UK know about our disease so much, because this is where we came from. But a lot of people don't know that.
We have one of
I
our
have
program directors here that was saying that they have there might be a genetic link,
It
but
is a
I don't
genetic,
know.
big,
So,
huge.
but Lainey, what
Yeah.
were you?
I was going to
Gonna-
jump in with a related question. So, in terms of our laws here in the US regarding discrimination on genetics, where do we land right now? Obviously, it's an ever-changing landscape, but any info would be great.
Well, I will have to email it to you from that other email.
Oh, I was
because-
asking our presenters, Melissa and Hannah. Thank you.
yeah. In terms of, well, for you, Amina, just want to say, sounds like you're the professional on your condition. Like we said, you know it better than we will ever know, because you have it. And then Lainey, for your question, you know, we have laws set in place that help protect us from being discriminated against. And, you know, it can protect individuals from discrimination in terms of employment and health insurance. We're talking premiums and employers of larger employers. One thing that it doesn't cover, sadly, is those special private life insurance policies. In terms of if you were to have found a genetic variant known with an increased risk or cancer predisposition or condition, those private life insurance policies can decline coverage, as well as members of the military, federal employees, or then those small businesses with fewer than 15 employees. But other than that, we have the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. It's called GINA. That actually came about, I believe, 2008. And that helps protect just from genetic discrimination for health insurance and employment. And we can include a resource too to GINA in the chat. And then also there's the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that protects individuals that with manifested genetic conditions, and mostly from workplace and public services. There's the Affordable Care Act. And then that kind of strengthened GINA by preventing those health insurers from denying coverage based on pre-existing conditions. And then I believe each state has their own specific additional protections, but GINA would be kind of that main one that we think about.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Lainey, that's such a great question, and also something that genetic counselors will discuss with you if you do decide to undergo genetic testing. That's often a topic that's discussed, and I saw some questions in the chat about like insurance coverage and stuff like that. So all of that logistical stuff, the legal stuff, insurance stuff, all that can be discussed with your genetic counselor or genetic provider as well too.
Yep. And then Carrie, did you have a question?
Yes, I have one more question. So you said that when you submit the genetic test, you submit it for very specific things that you're looking for. So if it comes back negative, do you then think about, okay, so what else could it be? And then submit a second one for other conditions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hannah, do you want to?
That's okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Because genetic testing can be so tailored to specific conditions, not a lot of the times, genetic counselors or genetic providers choose to do like a stepwise manner. They might start with a genetic test that focuses specifically on a few conditions that they may be suspecting. And if that comes back negative, they may have the discussion of expanding to a larger type of test that covers more of the genome, maybe something like whole exome or whole genome sequencing, which looks at a wide variety of genes in the genome. And that might be something that they choose to do if we do get a negative result.
And then in terms of why not just do whole genome testing the whole time? There are things that even whole genome is not going to catch because each test that we're running has different methods, whether that be something like next generation sequencing, SNP, copy number variant testing, deletions and duplications. Generally, the tests that we use most frequently are trying to catch a big picture of all of that. However, some have a very specialized touch at getting in and seeing the really, really small changes. And some of our broader tests are looking at more in a very fast way, just can miss some of those things. Some cannot see conditions that are associated with copy number variations. Our video that Hannah mentioned, we really try to go in depth on that because why wouldn't we just order whole genome testing on everyone, right? If it could just tell us everything, it's just sometimes it can't catch it. And we use words like reflex. We'll do this first. And if we're not seeing anything there, we'll reflex to another test to see if we missed something. So a lot of the times a chromosomal microarray might be run first, and then they might reflex to a whole exome or vice versa. Does that answer that question?
Yes, perfectly. And is it more difficult to get insurance to cover that second round if the first round comes back negative?
That can be a little bit more complicated.
Mhm.
One of the jobs as a genetic counselor is to advocate for you, the patient, on behalf of you to insurance companies. But providers can also help in that sense of when we're ordering genetic testing, we use special codes that we put in kind of saying the patient has A, B, and C. And there are trigger words that insurance companies, when they see, essentially kind of have to cover that testing. In terms of reflexing, if you're going back to another test, it might be one of those situations where you might need to be hitting another trigger word. Some labs are really great at, say we find a variant of uncertain significance, and within a certain number of days, they will actually do free testing on the parents to determine if this was something that was found within them as well, to know if this is maybe something could be more causative. They also have, say if you did a really specialized panel, some labs are really great at adding additional genes later when that single gene or couple genes came back without answer. It definitely depends on the lab, the insurance company. Some are just better than others, just to be quite fair. And some of these labs are really great at working with you in cost. You might get a bill for thousands of dollars and don't pay it, just call them. And most of them are really good at just trying to find something that is affordable for you as the patient.
I just want to point out the question in the chat related to I know we're almost out of time, but I want to flag this. The genetic testing. If genetic testing is denied, does that fall under the regulations of GINA?
By insurance, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No,
I
it's
know.
not discrimination.
I figured that
sadly.
was the answer, but I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure we got that.
It's sadly no. It can be really frustrating. And that's why we talk about maybe those code words, like sometimes like trying to put in red flag words, but technically, no, maybe they want insurance companies. It's the same thing if you tear a ligament and they're like, get an x-ray first. Well, we know this x-ray is not going to show us the torn ligament. Sometimes labs might require, or insurance companies might require you to start smaller before they allow those much bigger tests, even if they don't make sense for the condition.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Melissa said. This is kind of where that stepwise pattern that we discussed a bit before kind of comes into play. There are sometimes guidelines that exist out there where, you know, there's a certain way to do things and that way needs to be done, even though we know that may not be the best way to go about things. But sometimes it just like needs to be done, starting off with maybe a smaller, more targeted test, having that come back negative, and then continuing on to those larger tests to hopefully catch a diagnosis for a rare condition. So that's kind of where that stepwise method can come into play, especially when you're working with insurance and private insurance companies.
Yeah.
Basma, you have your hand up if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes. First of all, thank you for the time and for sharing all the information. I have a question related to if you guys ever come across sending tests to 2 different labs and getting different results. Does that ever happen?
Yes.
How do you
I have
feel?
personally experienced that. A lot of it has to do with there are a lot of testing companies out there. Not all of them are there are qualifications and things to be used by hospitals, and there's it's CLIA is the CLIA. They're kind of like those specifications to determine if this lab is qualified and if they follow the regulations. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other reputable labs that are not CLIA approved. It's in general, though, each lab has their own determining factors on whether or not something is classified pathogenic or benign. And then they'll include that in the report. A lot of the times these labs have genetic counselors working there that if that ever happens, it's actually quite wonderful. You can just call the lab GCs and say, explain to me why you classify this as this and they classified that as this. And most of the time they'll say, we didn't see this study, or we did this because of this. And then they actually can kind of converge and come to a conclusion. Other times there are direct to consumer testing sites that maybe their specificities or sensitivities of the test might be a little different than some other labs. So there could be room for false positives or false negatives. But in general, yeah, we've seen it. Hopefully it's through a lab that's reputable and there are lab GCs working there, and we can truthfully just get down to the bottom of it and put the studies together, the data population together, and see what's really happening.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that Jessica put a link in the chat to a database where laboratories and providers can basically post how they classified a certain variant, whether they determined it as disease-causing or pathogenic or benign or negative. And so that's kind of where you can go to, or providers go to kind of look and compare the different classifications that different laboratories use for a specific genetic change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and listening to us little GC students to attempt to talk to you guys.
Yes, thank you so much for joining and for listening. I hope that you can take some information away from this talk. And again, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to GC Connexins, Jess and Anna, and then also Wisconsin Rare, Lainey, Anna, and yeah,
Kimberly.
everybody at Wisconsin Rare. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for your participation and engagement. We will have Wisconsin Rare Disease Alliance follow up with everybody just to recap what we talked about today with some of the slides that we're recording, and then they'll also put all of the links to their website where the more in-depth recordings are that Hannah and Melissa had acknowledged throughout the rest of this presentation. So if you have any further questions or comments, look out for that email, and we'd be happy to be in touch with you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks all.